This is Small Talk with Jill, and I'm Jill. Today we're going to learn about Elizabeth Raffleson and the Underground Attic. The Underground Attic is a little pocket of decadence in upstate New York, filled with restored vintage treasures from 1820 to 1980, as well as unique vintage-inspired items. Elizabeth studied costume history in college and does the research and the restoration on pieces to restore them to their former glory. Above all, she is in the belief that we need more fun in our lives and that playing dress up is an integral part of that. Thank you for joining me today, Elizabeth. Before I begin our interview, I want to remind our followers that we are recording this in a not so normal time. Thank you to the men and women who are keeping this country going, and let's not forget those who have lost their lives during this COVID-19 pandemic.
Absolutely, thank you.
Now, they definitely have been challenging times. You and I are friends. We've known each other for quite some time, and when this was all coming together, we were sharing a lot and trying to figure out our direction. So it was an economic shock, wasn't it? Wouldn't you say? You know, how am I going to pay the bills? And I don't want to keep this on this topic for a long time, but I do want to discuss being a small business owner, and you're told, you know, you're a non-essential, so you have to temporarily take a pause.
Absolutely, yeah. It's definitely been a huge shift, and you know, the first bit of news with the college students leaving was step one of that shock, because you know, our town does have several colleges in it, and you know, a lot of us business owners depend on that. So already started adjusting, but then with the non-essential closings as well, that was definitely a huge shift, and you had to get really creative really fast.
So during these confined times, would you say that the creative juices were flowing, and I'm sure emotional too, from day to day?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was funny. I was saying to my mom, was like, I all of a sudden had kind of this rush of ideas under pressure, which in some ways was really awesome, because it forces you to, it's the necessity is the mother of invention thing, where all of a sudden things just kind of became very clear in a lot of directions of things I had been thinking about for a long time. And it was nice, not the silver lining with all of this was that I had the initiative and the time to execute a couple of those more experimental ideas.
Yes, I found the exact same thing, to work on software programs that you know, we never had the time to go through the tutorials through.
Exactly. Yep.
You spoke about your mom, and now I'm going to change direction. I remember one of the first stories your mom, I've had the pleasure of meeting your mom. She is your biggest cheerleader, one of your biggest cheerleaders. And I think I remember the story correctly, but maybe you could give me your interpretation of it. She told me that early on she could see your love for fashion. I think you were taking writing lessons, and you would lay out your outfit the night before and blingy. What was this?
So yeah, there's kind of two parts to it. So the first part was that when I was around 2 years old, I was already laying out my outfits, coordinated with all of the jewelry, of which there was a lot of jewelry, and the shoes, and then all the rainbow colored everything. But then I also was really into horses, and so when I would go to take my riding lessons, I had a horse. And not only did I have all of the sparkle mane gel for them, but I also had the pink sparkly lace-up riding boots and the rainbow sparkly helmet cover. And I was in Pony Club, which is a national organization for riders. And when I would go to do these dressage shows and stuff, I would go fully decked out in all of my sparkly gear. So not much has changed.
So you started a trend.
Yeah. Yeah. Had to keep it fun, right?
I love it. So now that jewelry, was it vintage jewelry? Was it jewelry?
Yes, it was.
Mom's jewelry box?
Some of it was my mom's, and then actually another local organization, the Catskill Puppet Theater, they were really and are really good friends of my parents, and they had a lot of extra supplies that they would use to make the puppets, and they had this magical barn full of all of this beautiful fabric and all of this old jewelry that a lot of it they'd use for parts, and so I would get the offloading of all of that stuff, much of which was vintage, and get to play dress up in all of it.
Oh my gosh. So I'd be safe in saying that this really started out 2 years or maybe even younger.
Yep, absolutely. It's been a lifelong passion.
That is absolutely incredible. I don't know if you noticed, but I'm wearing an Underground Attic piece.
It's so beautiful.
I love this piece, and it was made in Austria.
Yep.
For department store, no, a boutique in Dallas.
Yes. Yep, absolutely. In 1950s, and the dress I'm wearing is from the 1940s, so we're a decade apart.
That is so incredible. So when you go looking for pieces or pieces find you, you are passionate about the stories behind it. I know that.
Absolutely.
Can you share with us one of your favorite stories?
Ooh, that's a great question. Let me think about one of my favorite pieces. I can tell you about one of my favorite collections I ever acquired, because it was one of the first ones I ever did. It was actually right when I was starting my business, and I, had very limited income at that point. I was still a college student, and a friend of mine in town had told me that there was a woman who lived about 20 minutes away who had been a fashion designer, and she had this whole amazing collection of vintage clothing that spanned across 100 years that she used as inspiration for the pieces she made. And so I ended up buying a whole collection of her pieces that she used as inspiration, but also some of the pieces she designed. And it was so cool. I think I still have a couple of pieces that I kept, and I do have a couple, she was just downsizing her house, so I actually have a couple of pieces of furniture that were in her dressing room that I have in the shop still as my display. So.
Are you allowed to tell us who the designer is?
I know her first name was Marianne. I'm sure I have her last name written down, but she was only about 20 minutes away from here. And she just did small little collections, runs of stuff, but the things were really beautiful and they were very trend informed for each decade. But then she also did throwbacks, which is why she had stuff that dated back to like the 1880s.
Oh my goodness.
Which was amazing. Yeah.
And those items are so delicate and
absolutely.
Delicate. So where did you learn how to restore these items? I mean, I can't pick up a piece and say, oh, here, I can't even darn a sock, okay?
Well, I actually sewing has been another lifelong passion of mine. I started sewing actually when I was in middle school. I actually had gotten into an accident, and I didn't have use of my left leg for a while. And so while I was laid up, I had to find fun things to do at home as a 7th grader. So I ended up getting really into sewing, and I did a lot of draping at that point. I didn't do so much with patterns. I was really just having fun seeing how it all flowed together. But then I ended up going to school years later to the fashion design program at SUNY Oneonta. And through that did a concentration in historic costume, and I was able to go into their archives and see a lot of the pieces for study. But then I also had a project where I had to fix 10 pieces of antique clothing and fully restore them. But I had help. I had an advisor who walked me through the whole process.
Wow, that's incredible. And it just tells people the quality of the items that they're going to find in your shop. So we're actually recording this also the day after Easter.
Yeah.
If you notice, yesterday, I'll insert a picture here. I wore one of my favorite hats from the Underground Attic. And I think there's a story behind that too, isn't there?
Yeah, that was the hat you bought for the tea at the Otsego, right?
Yes.
Yes. So I believe that one was 1950s, and I got that from a woman who had this amazing hat collection. I mean, I must have gotten over 100 hats from her, and they had been not only hers, but she had her mother's, and she had some of her grandmother's hats as well. There was just this amazing series of them. But yeah, that one was from her, I believe.
We've had fun with that hat too.
Yeah.
I'll also show everyone the picture we did. Remember that In Style cover we took
Yes.
with Rita Williams, and we tried to duplicate the shot. So for fun for our followers here, I'll add that into this as well.
Awesome.
So I know you're so passionate about vintage, and I've always loved older things, and knowing you has just been enlightening to me and bringing back my passion for it. I can remember um, I was home, going through YouTube and Amazon Prime and all those things, and I came across that show, and I couldn't wait to tell you. I texted you, and I go, Vintage Voyager, you've got to watch it. So I know you're a huge fan, and also of Butch
Wax Vintage, yeah, Butch Vintage. I love him.
I love those. So, tell me your interpretation of how you see other vintage collectors.
Yeah, I've actually always thought this was really interesting because vintage collecting in some ways is so different and so similar to the way that other people buy for their boutiques, because in all reality, yes, you're picking from a much wider range, but there's also this kind of curation process that goes into any boutique that is the same for a vintage boutique. Some people like it all, and they, will take in basically anything that's old enough. But there's so many people who have such a specific eye for something that they end up curating, more towards casual stuff, or they only do mid-century modern, or they only do 1930s deco. And I think it's so interesting to see these little capsules that people put together. It's just like a regular fashion collection, or like a boutique in any other retail setting that would put that together. And it's been really interesting seeing what other people choose to pick, and then also figuring out what I would want to pick that will also have an appeal to lots of people. So it's definitely a delicate balance between picking things that you love, but also providing things that lots of people will love.
So when you talk vintage, some people automatically go, "Oh, it's old."
Mm-hmm.
They don't realize the cherished quality of it. For instance, this is wool and cotton, natural fibers that are a positive impact on our environment. For people who feel a little lost when they walk into a vintage shop, they're not sure how to incorporate something into their particular style, or they're a little concerned about sizes because everything is so different nowadays.
Yeah.
Can you give us some tips on how to shop vintage?
Absolutely, yeah. So there's a couple things I could suggest. One is, first off, at least in my store, if you have questions, you should just right away please ask me, because a lot of times people will feel like vintage clothing only comes in super tiny sizes, or it's all like crazy and costumey looking. But in all reality, I find vintage clothing that's all the way up to a modern size 24 pretty often. And it's just a matter of having a wide selection of things you choose from. But sometimes it can be overwhelming to go in and try to find those sizes, by yourself. So always feel free to ask me, and I can help pick out things in your sizes. Which leads me to my second point, which is knowing your measurements is incredibly helpful for vintage clothing, because all of the sizing is so different now than it used to be. I had found a 1950s dress that was dead stock, which means it had never been worn before. It still had the tags on it. And it was a size 18 then, and when I measure it, it equated to a modern size 8. So you really need, if you know your measurements, it's easy breezy because you can just run around and, hold up the tape measure, find what that equates to in modern sizing, and then you'll have a better idea when you go to try something on. And to the end of it being kind of costumey, there's 150 years worth of fashion, and you don't need to combine it the way it was combined at a certain time. I all the time take modern pieces and combine them with vintage pieces. This 1940s dress, which I'm wearing right now, I'll wear with, little booties, and I'll, wear my aviator shades with them, and it makes it look really modern and fun and not like you just stepped out of an old ad.
You're creating your own style. Let's talk about being a shop owner. So how old were you when you first opened your shop? And I know you've changed locations.
Yeah. That's a great question. I think that I started selling online when I was 20, and I opened my first brick and mortar when I was 22, and I am now 27. So my first brick and mortar that I opened was in an upstairs location on Main Street, and it was above Roots Brewing Company, which is one of my favorite places. And it was such a fun time. It was my first shop. It actually used to be my boyfriend's old photography studio. And he was getting ready to end the lease right as I was graduating college. And so I ended up taking the lease over and was just going to use it to sell, as an office for my online selling. Mm-hmm. And then I was still working part-time at the Green Toad Bookstore, another awesome place in town.
Another Main Street. Oh, yeah.
I love that place. But when I was working there, I remember Jim, the owner, basically saying, hey, if you're going to have this office anyway, you should just consider opening the door around Christmas time and see if people come in. And people did come in. And then I ended up having a store a month later. So it kind of snowballed really fast. And I was in that spot for a year and a half before I moved to my new location, which is across from City Hall on Main Street in Oneonta.
So for those viewers that aren't in the area and they want to see more about the items that you have and purchase, that you have an Etsy shop.
Yep, absolutely. So Etsy is actually how I got started, and I still use it. I primarily use my website, which is theundergroundattic.com, because
we'll link everything in this video too.
Oh, yay, good. Okay, cool. But yeah, the website's really nice because I can combine some of the vintage inspired items I have with the true vintage items I have. Where on Etsy, it has to be just the vintage stuff. So I still use Etsy because it's a great way to get your name out there, and they've been awesome to me. It's how I got started, but I also use my website most often.
Now, are you interested in any viewers who might have some incredible vintage pieces that have been passed down generation to generation? Are you interested in them in contacting you?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks for asking that. So generally at this point, I'm taking items that are 1970s and before. And I would say from the 60s and 70s, I do really all the fun, really wild stuff. And then pre that, I'm always looking. So 1950s and before is stuff that I'm always looking for because that stuff's harder to come by.
And I know the answer to this, and I'm excited for you to share the earliest piece that you have.
Whoa, yeah, absolutely. So actually, it might have changed since I told you, actually. So the oldest one I had had for a long time was I had a pence jug, which is a really small purse. I wish I had it with me, but it was from 1820, and it was silk crochet, and it was red and green stripes with steel cut beads, but there's one that's almost identical that is in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And I actually still have that for sale in the shop. I wish I had a little picture of it. But now the oldest item I have, I actually acquired a collection of hats from a museum deacquisition, and I ended up with a bonnet that is from 1770. Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing.
That's an Easter bonnet.
Yeah. Oh man, that would have been a perfect Instagram post. That's okay. Next year.
Next year. All right, now I'm going to ask you another question that I'm hoping you can answer. Who is the most famous person you have dressed or sold to, if you're allowed to share?
That's a great question. I think maybe I kind of have two. Okay, so one is there is a model. You helped set this up. There's a model who is out in LA named Athena, who is also a space scientist.
I love her Instagram.
Yeah, but we did an outfit that had some vintage pieces in it that she wore for Yuri's night. So that was one, and then the other one was there was actually a woman who came into the shop who came in actually when I wasn't there. My mom was holding down the fort, and she came in, she bought a bunch of clothes. My mom said she was really nice, and then maybe about a month or two later, I was in the shop, and this woman came back in, and my mom went, oh, that was the person who came and bought X, Y, and Z, and her name is Laura Kitty, and she is a fashion designer for a brand called Marshmallow by Lady, but she is also a fashion historian, and I kid you not, there was an interview with her in the book called Nasty Galaxy, which is about vintage clothing. It's by Sophia Amoruso. And there's an interview with Laura Kitty in that book, which is sitting on my coffee table in the shop. And so after she left, I was like, I think that's her. And I went over, and indeed, it was an interview with her. But she's come back to the shop often, and she's an awesome customer and has brought friends back. And yeah, just great.
How exciting. Well, you do an incredible job, and I know that your reach is going to be far through this video. We're going to showcase you to the world and hope that we can bring more business not only to Oneonta, New York, but to the Underground Attic. Is there anything that you want to add? Anything that you want to tell the followers?
That's a great question.
Besides, like and subscribe to this.
Yes, definitely do that. And I think the other thing is if I'm all about fashion being a fun endeavor, and if you have questions on how to kind of really hone in on what your spark is with fashion and with vintage specifically, to feel free to shoot me a message. I have so many different types of things that I carry in the shop, and I just might have an idea of a direction of something new and fun you could try that you might not have considered before.
Well put. Well put. I think you're one of the most inspiring young business owners I've ever met, and I'm truly honored. And it's been indeed a pleasure that you have been on this video chat with me.
Thank you for doing it. I'm so excited about this whole series. I think it's a great thing for our area and just a nice thing for to have happening during this time. It's a perfect use of the time.
Well, when we get back to our new norm, we're going to have you back on. We're going to continue with this YouTube channel. It's not going to be just
fabulous.
Not just a COVID-19. We're going to do an after COVID-19. But I wish much success in your business, and I wish you good health. And I love and adore you.
Oh, same.
And happy vintage shopping.
Yay! Thank you.
Bye. Don't forget to like and subscribe and share this video.